Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Tonight, I want to welcome Ken Johnston and Bret Sheppard. Ken is a former civilian astronaut, consultant, pilot, aerospace worker, Marine, and NASA whistleblower that worked with the Apollo moon mission. Bret is an author, contactee, experiencer, artist, and lunar and Mars anomaly researcher. How are you gentlemen tonight?
Really good.
We're doing just fine, Chris.
Very good. I want to thank y'all so much for taking the time to do this tonight. I'm very excited. I've been looking forward to this because we're going to be exploring what I consider is probably one of the greatest mysteries of our time, whether you consider it to be a conspiracy theory or all disinformation or that we didn't go to the moon. You know, I think it's still something that we need to explore because there's so much that is disinformation out there about it. You know, what is the moon? Have we gone there? Do we have a secret space program? And how far does it go? Before we get into any of that, I'd like to get a little bit more about each of your background. And Mr. Johnston, we'll start with you. Just go ahead and give us a little bit about your background. What got you started with NASA?
Well, I guess it goes all the way back to, 1962 when I joined the Marine Corps and went on into officer pilot training. And we were doing just fine till Vietnam was getting started up real big, and they wanted to switch me over and have me fly helicopters. And I was at a point in my training that said that I didn't have to make a revert to helicopters since I was into jets. And so I took that offer and said, okay, I'll become a civilian again. And I went back to becoming a civilian. And I went to work at Houston, where my brother, Dr. A.R. Johnston, was the director at the Apollo Lunar Surface Experiment. No, that's not it. It was over at the lunar, where was he? At the vacuum chambers, where we tested the spacecrafts inside of the big vacuum chambers, Chamber A, which was the largest vacuum chamber in the world at the time. And then Chamber B, which just barely big enough to put the lunar module inside. So I went to work for the Grumman Aerospace Corporation as one of their civilian astronaut consultant pilots, and a little over 3,000 hours as a spacecraft pilot. And I never got to launch off of the Earth, but my job was to help test it. There were four of us in the vacuum chambers, and then turn around and help train the NASA astronauts how the lunar module worked. And then, of course, they went to the moon, and the rest of us, we wound up getting laid off because Grumman had to lay off over a third of the employees. And I went over to the Lunar Receiving Laboratory where I caught the first cruise coming back. And as that, I was the director of the Data and Photo Control Department, which kind of brings it up to the point of how did I wind up with all of the good information and materials and things that I have? Well, it winds up that because I was the director, every time requests were made from the original film, negatives, pictures, prints, you name it, I would always order an extra one to keep in my office so that I could show people when they were coming in looking for material. And then, of course, that time ran out and they laid us all off, and everybody was just dumping all the copies and things they had. So I made what later became known as Ken's Archive. I kept copies of everything that was there in my office instead of just throwing them away in the Dempsey dumpsters. And now they wound up as the best records of showing proof of what was seen on the moon, as well as some of the stuff that was on Mars. And that was where, let's see, I guess, about 1998, man by the name of Richard C. Hoagland was in Seattle, Washington, and he was, I went to work, I left the Space Center in Houston, went to work up in Seattle as a flight instructor on Boeing 737s. And then there was a team of us there that were pilots and all, and we kept each other informed of stuff going on in space and all that. And one of the guys called me at night when I was off duty. He says, hey, there's Richard C. Hoagland we've been listening to on the radio, giving a program downtown Seattle. You ought to get down there and say. So I wrote up a letter of introduction and telling him who I was, and I went down to check in and gave the young lady at the front desk my identification and handed her a letter of introduction. She said, oh my God, you're who we've been looking for. And I go, uh-oh, I'm in trouble. So she went and got Mr. Hoagland. He came out, and I invited him to my house and opened up the big safe we had and started looking at some of the materials, and they were just flabbergasted at seeing stuff that they had heard didn't exist. And so since that time, copies have been made. They've been copies of everything are with Roswell and their research center. There's several copies of other universities around. And that way, there was no reason for anyone to try to take me out of the picture because it's already too late. Anyway, that's kind of brought me up to that point. And then since then, now we've been looking at more information on what's been known as the secret space program. So hopefully, my coming forward has helped numbers of other people that have been involved to come forward and tell their story so we can get a good solid picture of what really has been going on behind the scenes and as part of what you've been researching into. I guess that kind of brings you up to date where I am.
Very good.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much.
One last thing is I turned 77 on October the 2nd, so you can count me in.
Happy late birthday.
Thank you too.
Okay, and Mr. Sheppard, tell us about your background. I understand you had some contact experiences at an early age that kind of ties into everything. You also had an encounter with a strange woman that showed you lunar photographs. And tell us all about that and how you got hooked up with Mr. Sheppard, with Mr. Johnston.
Well, to start out, I guess I was extremely young, and I was traumatized, abused, or whatever. And during that abuse, I was actually taken out of my body, and it wasn't like a dream state. It was as though it felt very physical. So I was taken out of my body and literally put on a ship by a goddessy looking woman, and there were actually little men piloting the ship, and they wore masks like human masks. It was very strange. And I guess they considered themselves not so good looking, so like a grotesque or something. And anyway, they flew me to the moon, where there were these huge statues. There were translucent and metallic looking type buildings. And I thought, I thought, okay, this maybe is a dream or something. But it felt so real. It felt so physical. And I was really too young to differentiate or to debunk myself and say that that was some kind of dream or some kind of implantation of an experience or something like that. But anyway, they told me that that they had taken me out of my body so that I didn't have to feel pain. So back in my body I went, and still felt pain, residual pain from what was going on. Anyway, later on, that was when I was really young, and then I got into high school. I was an artist. I was taught art by some Nordic lady in Chicago. I worked for the Playboy Club, and I was told years later that this woman was actually a Nordic type alien, or a tall white alien. And she taught me about perception and about art. And so I became an artist at a young age. And later on, when I was 15 years old, I actually lost contact with Ino, that was her name. And she didn't have a last name, and I was never able to find her since. But if anyone does, that'd be great. But she taught me art. And when I was in an art class when I was 15, at the end of the day, a lady from Stanford Research Institute named Zamina showed me one image after another of what we would call anomalies nowadays. But back then, she was showing me pieces of larger lunar orbiter images, mostly lunar orbiter 1, but I've seen also some from later on.
Now, where did you come from, and where were you when this encounter happened?
I was in Lansing, Illinois at Thornton Fractional South High School, and it was an art class at the end of the day. And she had asked my art teacher to basically to show me images at the end of the day. She said that they were from various artists. That was interesting. So I stayed there, and she showed me images for 2 hours after school was out. It was dark when I went home, So these images were on a regular carousel, the type that Ken actually has in his closet, you know, of different images, like the old-fashioned slideshow projector type images. So she showed these on a big screen, one right after the other, and they were colorized. They were slightly tinted or whatever, but I could I could tell maybe that it was a similar style to different artists I knew, like Boris Vallejo or very classic 60s style artists, you know, Salvador Dali, that sort of thing. So I recognized some of the type of artwork it was, and I don't know if that's significant. But 40 years later, I started looking at lunar orbiter images from NASA, and I have a photographic memory. So I remembered every single image that Zemina showed me that day when I was 15 years old, and she asked me, "What do you think these are?" So it was very confusing to them that there were embedded images in their space images that I later found out were space images, because I found every single one that she showed me in the lunar orbiter images. So they were like little crops out of the lunar orbiter images, and just absolutely fantastic embedded art. You know, so I started as an artist doing
Did she say
a lot
what
of painting.
organization she was with or anything like that?
Yeah, she was from Stanford Research Institute. Absolutely. You know, so they made no bones about that. I just thought it was very strange because I contacted her later and she said, "I do not recall." That's something you say in court, you know, "I do not recall." And then I contacted my art teacher and he said the same thing, "I do not recall." Both of them have a background in, you know, government programs and that sort of thing. So that's why I asked him. I called him to, maybe he was going to tell me the truth, you know. But I remember that day very well. It actually happened, and I was stunned that my art teacher, both my art teacher and Zemina, denied it. So that was very interesting to me. So later on, I developed the Lunar Anomaly Research Society to look for more of those pictures that I saw when I was 15 years old. I didn't intend to look for anomalies, or I didn't know really a lot about that. So you know, my group started looking for anomalies and lunar images. I was still, of course, looking for my embedded art imagery that I saw when I was 15. And there was a lady in there in my group that that said that she was associated. One of her friends was Ken Johnston Sr. And at the time, she said that he was kind of watching our group, or he knew about it, and she was probably telling him about it. And I started contacting Ken because I realized that they were showing us images that were not real, entirely real. So these images, according to another friend of mine, Donna Hare, they actually used acetate to put over the images and paint out the skies black, and also get rid of anomalies and refilm it. You know, just like a Disney cartoon where they have the foreground, background, and middle ground on a transparency, and they put the character in the middle. So they refilm it that way. And Chesley Bonestell invented that particular operation. And he was also associated with NASA as a space artist. You know, I guess there's a group of them. Another one was, I'm not going to mention his name. I always get in trouble when I do. But
they had a whole department of them.
Yeah, there's a whole department of NASA affiliated artists who are touching these images up. And I'd like to say that Donna Hare was not one of them. She probably left for that very reason. And she also, to collaborate Ken's story, she got one of the NASA images out of the Dempsey dumpster. And she showed it to me, and it was far more detailed than anything NASA ever put out to the public. Now, the images Ken has and the one Donna showed me are some of the clearest lunar images I've seen. So she said she actually confirmed that these people were actually airbrushing out not just anomalies on the moon. There was one she talked about, a paperclip anomaly that Keith Laney discovered and Richard Hoagland made famous through his book. It was a paperclip anomaly, and she said that was the exact one she saw the NASA artists getting rid of in the lunar image, and then they would refilm it. So right after Donna gave me that image, I contacted Ken, and Ken said, "Would you like to see the next image from that one?" Because I showed him that image she gave me, and I said, "Sure." So anyway, that day was a very happy day for me, but kind of scary, because he was sending all of his entire archive through the internet, you know. So I'm collecting all of this information. I put it on a disc, and I even got kind of freaked out and gave it to a friend. You know, I gave a copy to a friend, and I said, if anything ever happens to me, try to get this out to the public, you know. So anyway, that's how our relationship started, and we have Ken came and got us out of Texarkana, Texas, which we weren't very happy to be there, and he moved us to Belen near him, and we helped him work on his me and Karen Christine Patrick helped him work on his autobiography with him. So it was a very exciting thing. I was absolutely enamored, you know, meeting Ken finally, and I knew he was the guy that had the good stuff, you know. So that was pretty much how we met, and we're still very good friends to this day, and we live in New Mexico.
Very good. Now, the burning question for those that believe we didn't go to the moon: did we go to the moon? And if so, the footage that we see, is that real? First, Mr. Johnston, I'd like to get your take, and then Mr. Sheppard.
Okay. Actually, that question was probably the prime number one question by the debunkers when they would try to contact us and or come out in the internet. When the internet, by the way, all the stuff Bret was talking about, when I was at NASA at the Lunar Receiving Laboratory, and where I had my office and all the data and photo control department, we didn't have internet. So when we finally got to the point where we were able to put things out for the public to find, it made things, people started saying, well, you know, that's not true, or you know, can you prove it? And I said, sure, there's no problem about that. And I would then publish or send copies of the original pictures, and that have, now that's one of the biggest things I would tell everybody. If you get a NASA photograph, have it facing right side up, look in the top left corner, and if it has the full photo number, which gives you the mission flight number, like Apollo 11, and then you get the reel, I should say, or cassette of film that particular camera was taking. You'll have that number, and then you'll have the specific sequence of pictures that were taken on that reel. If the picture you're looking at doesn't have any of that, start observing the pictures real carefully, and you'll see where they have been doctored and to try to hide things that were really discovered on the moon. And that's where Ken's archive and the places where I very quickly you know, made copies once we got computers that we can now make our own digital with such detail that it can show, you know, whether someone has doctored it or not. And I put those, like I say, with Roswell at the their museum and research centers, as well as other universities, Oklahoma City University, Oklahoma City, etc., and a few other individuals that have copies of them. So that's the way we've been able to get the true facts of these images and pictures and things out to the public. So, you know, once Bret and I've come forward with the data and information, pretty much they've backed off. All they keep tracking us, and then, you know, I was one individual who has been told to back off and leave us alone. Bret, you remember who I'm talking about here? Yeah, maybe
yes,
get into it.
I believe so. You mean James Oberg?
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, Jim Oberg and I actually knew each other back in the days at NASA, but he took over to become the #1 debunker in the world. He was out doing everything in the world to try to shoot me down and claim I didn't do this, I didn't do that, and then all I would do is turn around and publish copies of the documents from NASA, the government, of my job and my ID and the numbers and et cetera. And just basically, although the bad part is, when I would be invited to go overseas to countries and give presentations and talks and things at universities and places. I was in India, and they came into my room at like 1 o'clock in the morning and said, we got information that you're not who you claim you are, that you're not telling the truth, etc. I said, well, let me guess, is that James Oberg? They said, how did you know? I said, he does this all the time to try to debunk and shoot me down. And they said, well, okay, we'll take you downtown. We were up in Mountain Inn Resort. They took me down to what I thought we were going to a university to go over my records and information. Said they took me to the airport and gave me a ticket and said, leave now while you can and don't come back. So that's what I've had to deal with up to this point by coming forward, is that there are still paid people out to quiet down or shut down, not just me, but others that have had access to actual contact with extraterrestrials, as well as pictures, information, all the data in the world. And because the governments, what was this back in, Bret, you can help me out here. Now, forgive me a little bit here, because I was in an auto accident just a year ago, and it was a little bit tough, and sometimes I go blank, and I have to get prompts. But then I can bring my memory back up to date, and we're doing fine. So look out for people that are texting their phones and doing things like that when they're driving, and they don't realize you stopped and they rear end you. That can be pretty dangerous. So now, Bret, I've forgotten where I was.
We were talking about, I had asked you if the moon landing was real and if the footage we see is actually real as well.
Yes, and that's where people start off about, well, I don't believe we really went to the moon. And I say, okay, well, now, do you believe this? Do you believe that? How about this picture? How about that? Do you think we did that? By the time I tell them, they say, well, they're always saying, well, yeah. And I said, then how do you come up with saying we didn't go there when we have all the documents, records, and proof that show that we did? And by and large, it pretty well shuts down the people who are afraid to believe that we are not alone in this universe and the galaxies, but that they're afraid of the truth, and that's the best thing I can say for that. So anyway, that's kind of where we are now.
The Stanley Kubrick theory that he directed the moon landing.
Well, that's partially true.
It's not quite true. Go ahead, Bret.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing, Ken, probably. But Stanley Kubrick was responsible for filming a studio version, the live version, studio version of the landing, which they showed the public. But the original intent was just in case something happened to the astronauts, failure was not an option, and they had to show something. So
you have to put in the fact there, Bret, that was during the time of the Cold War with Russia, if you remember.
Yeah,
and the only way. Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, the other reason why they eventually showed that to the public instead of the real actual moon landing is because, according to William Tompkins, there were giant alien ships on the surface of the moon, looking down at the little tiny LEM and the astronauts. So this is the other problem, is they don't want to, according to the Brookings report and the Robertson panel, they don't want to tell the public the truth because they're afraid that chaos will be in religion and socioeconomics and national security and all of these other issues. So they had determined that from some simple experiment that they did with H.G. Wells in the War of the Worlds broadcast. So there's things that are very archaic up to now regarding the cover-up of the moon landings. And they really did land on the moon. What they're covering up is what's actually there.
Well, that was what Brookings Institute published in their report to the government, and that is the concern was because of the effect. This was back in 1960. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think it was 1929 when they came out the War of the Worlds, where aliens landed a spaceship up around in New York, and they were going out and killing people, and even to the point to where some people listen, and they all had radios in, and people listening to the radios that it was being broadcast on as. But if you didn't turn on your radio and you didn't get at the beginning where they were telling that it was a story, they were just telling a story. some people panicked, jumped off of buildings, committed suicide, and that came up to the point where the attitude from the government was the people are not ready yet to deal with direct contact with extraterrestrials. Well, we're now what? 60, 70 some odd years later, and by and large, you go out in the public and tell them, oh, do you believe there's such a thing as aliens or extraterrestrials? Well, sure, we're not the only ones in the universe. That's the average response you get. But back then, you have to understand this was actually before the beginning of, right at the end of World War I and the beginning of World War II. And people were not ready to deal with that, plus the effect it had upon most people's religion, thinking that we are the only creation that God created in the entire universe. And I think it's an awfully big universe to think that there's not other intelligent beings. And since then, like Bret has had direct experiences, and so have I, and that we know that we are not alone. That's about the best thing I can tell you right there.
Now, speaking of that, there were communications during the moon landing that indicated that they were being observed or watched. Could you talk a little bit about that? First, Mr. Johnston, and then Mr. Sheppard.
Okay. Yeah, that's true. And part of the communications link coming from the moon to the Earth, and actually Australia's big antennas were, whenever it's facing the moon, was one of the biggest sources of picking up the signals. Now, there was a signal that came back, and I was actually in mission control back in the backup room in case we had any problems, where communications came in, and they were talking about, and this would have been Neil talking, he says, they're here, they're on the rim of the crater, they're watching us. And then they switched off that, blocked it, because there was I guess it's 3 or 5 second delay where they can then block things and then let it broadcast, because the whole world was listening and watching the landing on the moon. So in order for the crew to get information to mission control and the bosses, they had to switch over to the medical transmission line from their communicators when they were out on service, from their antennas, went to the spacecraft, the lunar module. It was transmitted from there either directly to the Earth or directly to the command module as it was orbiting around the moon. So that's how that was blocked, and only in certain instances where we were would we have been able to pick up that signal that says we're not alone. They're here. They're watching us. And there are other slides and pictures, some of which I have, that actually show on other missions some of the. See, the biggest thing people don't understand is it's not all on the surface. The moon itself, to be in I'll shut up after. The moon itself, in order to be in the orbit that it is around the Earth, would have to be very lightweight, and almost to the extent that the majority of the inside of the moon is in rooms or hollow areas, etc. Now, if it were as big as it is if it was solid, it would actually, in order to maintain an orbit around the Earth, it would have to be much further away from the Earth than it is. So there are a lot of things that the average person, unless they've done a lot of research, don't understand, that the information is out there for you to come to grips on. And that's why in societies today, where people are now ready to accept the fact, and that's really what Bret and people like us are doing now, is getting information out to the world, the public, so they can do a lot simpler and find out the truth, that we aren't alone, and that the governments are finally at a point now where they're, and I guess I'll use the term, they're now ready to come forward and admit or saying that we are now discovered contact with extraterrestrials, et cetera, like that. And then your biggest problem was problems with religions around the world and stuff. We can talk about that a little bit. Bret, do you want to add something to that?
Well, yeah. As far as the communications go, some picked the same signal that you heard in mission control on a ham radio, and it was the exact same signal. And what's interesting is TRW it's engineered that specific technology, or we could communicate with astronauts out in space or on the moon. And this S-band signal, they don't just send the the intercom signal or the voice signal, they also send video. So they were actually watching the real video while Mission Control was showing the public the Stanley Kubrick version-ish of the video. So we were getting two versions. So this one guy that says that, well, I found the original footage of Apollo 11 moon landing in my garage or in a storage area. That's just the same video footage, you know, that they actually shot in a studio. They will refuse to show the public that there is life out in space because of different religions and such that believe this is the only kingdom in heaven or something like that. But that is the truth. They're afraid there's going to be chaos if people realize that there are interdimensionals, there are extraterrestrials within our 3D realm, you know. And what's interesting is that these communications through the S-band and such are also sent with like light rays, you know. So this particular signal is sent through light rays and through radio waves. So you're getting, you know, two different types of signals. And what's very interesting, I think, is what people want to know is why are they hiding this from us, you know? And that would be the archaic reason why they are hiding it, is because of national security reasons. Even though scientists all over the world, they're not at war and they share everything. That's why we brought a bunch from Nazi Germany, Project Paperclip, to the United States to develop our space program. So we've got all these guys. William Tompkins was in charge of a lot of these radio signals, television signals, that sort of thing. And he actually sat in a separate room and watched a different uplink than the public saw. And he literally said that in one of his interviews. So I believe the guy that made that technology over the entire affiliated NASA higher-ups that are not telling the public the truths about these things. And partially, some of that is because of secrets. Some of it's Department of Intelligence, the DIA, you know, the Army, CIA, all of those other agencies are very concerned about the public knowing the truth even about what's on Earth. So a lot of these extraterrestrials that are out there have intermingled with us. Some of them look exactly like us, so we wouldn't really know. And the other thing is the interdimensional aspect of it is that we are all interdimensional aspects. So that's what's kind of neat, is light goes through all dimensions. And for us to incorporate into this body, we would have to come from another dimension or the space that's in front of us. So that's about that signal.
Very interesting.
Okay.
Now, I have a question for you, Mr. Johnston. You had access to the NASA photo lab, and I understand you walked into some, I guess you could say they were kind of scrubbing the images.
Yes, as a matter of fact, I was over at the Lunar Receiving Laboratory, and I'd get requests for specific pictures from scientists from all over the world, and then I had direct access over to the photo lab. Now, that's where all of the original films, negatives, and copies and prints and things were located. And up until, 15, 20 years later, which they then moved off of campus into, I think it was TRW, the company that maintained that. But at any rate, the pictures, I went to the photo lab, and I was going to pull up some pictures for some of the samples, because a lot of the pictures were made of rocks or things on the lunar surface, and those were used to show the orientation of that particular sample that was picked up and brought back as to what its angle was with respect to the sun. So that kind of made a difference to them as to about how much radiation it would be getting, how long it had been on the lunar surface. It was all kinds of information that the geologists and things needed to be able to analyze the samples that they were getting in and to have to research. So I go into see, most people would go into the photo lab and stop at the front desk where people were, and they'd put in a request for a particular picture by number, and if it was available, they would go and pull it out, bring it up front, and give it to them there. Myself, I would go around behind that, go into the second area room, and then this is where there were personnel that were hired to take some of the pictures and then smudge them out, doctor out events and things. Each one was assigned a particular picture, and they would work on that to clear it up so that it's good. And I walked in there sitting at the table, and actually, now, Bret, you might have to, I think Donna was one of them, or one of her best friends.
Yeah, that was
one of the ladies.
Yeah,
that was doctoring one of the pictures. And I said, "What are you guys doing?" And one of the guys says, how did he say that? He says, "Oh, we're oh, geez." There goes a man. He says, we're doctoring them up because people would look at these and
he said they were strippers.
Yeah, that was it. That's right. The guy said, "Well, we're professional strippers. We're stripping out the material that would be confusing to the population that wouldn't understand what they were seeing." And there are some pictures of a craft that was off the coast of California at the time. The picture I was looking at it, and they were doctoring, painting that right out, and etc. And also pictures on the moon, the lunar surface, as well as in orbit around the moon, and during translunar insertion, and also back to Earth. They were being followed all the way to and from the moon on each and every one of the missions. So that's the experience I had with people doctoring up the deals. So in that particular case, I just took the picture I had and went back to my office and made a note of the fact of exactly what they were doing at the time, and kept it in my lab report. Once my time and duty with them was over with several years later, I made sure that I kept a copy of all of it myself. Well, after all, it was my office, right?
Anything to add to that, Mr. Sheppard?
All kinds of stuff to add to that. One of the things that intrigued me about Ken's story is when he was doing a Smithsonian interview, and he talked about the lunar base that he saw in Tsiolkovsky crater and how that came about. And I'll let him tell that story. But one thing I would like to add to that is that that story kind of corroborates the image doctoring deal that they were doing in the lab with the photos. They were also doing it to the 16 millimeter Moyer video.
Right. Yeah. I guess I might add to that on the backside of the moon, there's a crater. Actually, it's right on the terminator between front and backside, and that's a very large crater, about almost 120 miles across, called Tsiolkovsky. Now, it was photographed by the Russians that actually got to the moon and took pictures before we did because of the big race that was going on. At any rate, the pictures that, let's see, that was at Apollo 15?
Apollo 14.
14, okay, thank you.
Yeah, that was with Edgar Mitchell, yeah.
That's absolutely. And in fact, that there were comments that were made during the flight from Edgar and some of the others. But the main thing about it, inside the crater of Tsiolkovsky, if you look in the middle of the crater, there's mounds that have, you talk about 120 miles wide to impact, then the material squished back up into the middle and created mountains and things in the middle. Over on the side of the rim of one of the craters is a whole base of about 5 illuminated domes from the inside, professionally or engineered, clustered together inside of it, which was painted out later, but I have the originals. So that we had evidence that there was a base on the moon while we were still trying to get onto the moon. So it's been quite a fascinating experience to take a look at what was released to the public and what was actually in the archive and records and information there. So, yep, that's one of the best pictures to start with. That shows what do you call it? A base. Call it a base. We had five domes of light, and and some of the stuff that we have on Mars shows where tracks have been made, and also on the moon too. Now I think about it, that once we got into the last 2 or 3 missions to the moon, where we had the rovers could drive, they could get further away from the lunar module where they landed. There are tracks and evidence that shows that they crossed over tracks that weren't ours. So, yep, there are a lot of things that were going on that the average person doesn't know anything about unless they happen to run into someone like Bret or myself, or been to conferences that we've been willing to go forward and then risk our lives in many cases to bring the information public. And unfortunately, you have to be careful because there are people out there that are faking and fudging stuff that's not worth your time. Be sure you've got the actual information, data, and the source of it, and then you decide for yourself what you're looking at.
Now, is any idea what kind of beings are occupying these bases?
Well, I think the most important thing is it's not just bases on the surface, because in fact, you can help me out here, Bret. I think it was Apollo 14. No, it was Apollo 16. On the way back to the Earth and on trans-Earth, and so just before they left, while they were in lunar orbit, when the lunar module came up and docked with the command module, they did a separation of the lunar module and were able to remotely fire its retro rockets to cause it to come down and impact on the moon. And I have pictures to show what the seismic transmission was back to the Earth. When it impacted the moon rang like a bell. And this is one of the things, because and part as I mentioned at the very beginning, is that if it was a solid mass moon, it would have to be in a much further away orbit, because it is pretty darn much hollow on the inside. We know that there are now bases of several different species of aliens that have maintained bases within the inside of the moon. So that's, I don't know if that answers that question or not, but it's, a lot has been going on, and there's a lot available, and the information is there, but and it's all coming public. We are now moving into the phase of what we're calling full disclosure, where they're taking the information I have put out, and also the governments are reaching the point where they have no other choice other than say, okay, we have kept these secrets because of fear of panic amongst the population. But population has now grown to the point where it's mature enough to say, well, so long as they're not killing us, they're here investigating. And if you go back in ancient histories, which we can talk about a little later, about how life started on this planet, you can find out that people are ready and willing to listen, even people in religions. And then we get into that talk a little bit more. I also am an ordained minister, etc. That I went through a phase of my life where I had to handle that part of education and understanding of life and the existence of life throughout the universe. With that, I'll shut up for a moment. Bret, go for it.
Okay.
Any indication of what types of beings are occupying the moon, these bases?
Yeah, I do know a few of them, types or whatnot. One of them is looks like us. They literally look like us. They're from Aldebaran, and there's their planet literally died. The sun Aldebaran is a big red dwarf, and they had a Aldebaran B. I think they were from there. Their sun literally died, so they left, and they assisted with the intergalactic project of our moon. So it's built of different bits and pieces of everything in the galaxy, and including Earth material. So mostly on the surface. And the thing is let's see, there's an amphibious green type of being there that is the underling of a taller, more reptoid looking type being. And these are the same beings William Tompkins observed giving our astronauts the finger on the edge of the crater. So there are these certain types of beings up there, including our military, who does projects up there. The NSA does projects up there. According to Vance Davis, they actually fix satellite dishes on the moon, on the Terminator, where an alien signal can come in and they can send the signal back to Arecibo or the Very Large Array here in New Mexico. So yes, there are beings out there that a lot of them are not like us, but the ones that bother our government the most, I think, are the ones that do look like us.
Yeah, I might add to that. If you get into the ancient histories of human existence on this planet, you'll find that there are the Anunnaki, which were the giants that are in our history that are mentioned in some of the ancient writings in ancient Egypt, as well as the Romans, etc. So there have been information kept and brought forward about, and you use a lowercase, gods of other beings, and this is where some of the extraterrestrials either were misinterpreted or got a little carried away with being treated as though they were gods. So that's the problem that you run into with the population, the masses, is we have our beliefs in our Bible and our understanding of the existence of beings and how we were created, and there's missing information here and there that I studied in theology, and you're going to find that if you have an open mind and you do your research right, you can come to the understanding of that the aliens that have been direct in contact, and Bret was talking about some of them in some of the lab places where they accept the fact that there is a supreme being in God that they accept as well. So there's so much that we have to learn, and so much we have to mature to, that we can deal with and become and take our place throughout the galaxies as a sentient, intelligent being. Right now, we may not be so intelligent. If you take a look at the way just driving back home tonight, this one car whirled around us, flipped me the finger, and almost caused us to have that because he wanted to get home too soon, I guess. So we're part of an experiment in reality with how we can mature to be intelligent beings enough to take our place in the universe. With that, I'll shut up. Okay?
Very good. Now, when the astronauts got back, well, I should say, were they ever briefed on any of this before they left? And were they just told to shut their mouths about any of all of this?
I'm going to take that one because I worked with just every one of the missions astronauts, and even when they were testing our lunar module in the vacuum chambers in the command module. Incidentally, my first cousin, Captain Don Garrett, just passed away last week. I guess he was like 84, 85 years old, and he was Air Force attached astronaut to NASA to test the command module in the vacuum chambers, just like I was attached to 4 of us to test the lunar module in Chamber B, and he was in Chamber A. Anyway, sorry about that. I just found out this today of the loss of my cousin there. But that's what's happening around the world, is so many people have kept their mouths closed and shut for so long that the governments have been able to keep things quiet until people died off. But then some of us put the information out to the world, and we're getting there. Now, back to your original question that Bret took. You're going to refresh my memory a little bit here, how far you want to go with it, and I'll pick up with, you talked about the different species.
Oh, no, I had asked if they were briefed on any of this, the aliens or anything on the moon before they left.
The answer really is most of them, no, they weren't. However, take a look at the pictures of the first public appearance of, say, the Apollo 11, the crews. Let's see, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins. And they're at a press release, and you would think that they would be jumping out of their skin so excited and talk about what all we did and everything. They're sitting there with their mouths closed, not saying a word, and looking as dumb as they could be. And, Buzz Aldrin, he couldn't handle it so much that and he'll tell you, and I'm not saying anything rude about him, he became an alcoholic, and not until he finally was able to get out of that and start coming forward with information. Some of the other people have found ways. Edgar Mitchell, for one, was able to come out and give a lot of information out in somewhat of a coded way, because let's face it, a lot of us were threatened just as I had been about coming forward with the documents, records, and pictures that I came forward. That, you've got to protect your family and everything else, and you hope someone has got the guts or is in a position or protected enough that they can come forward. And that's where me going to Roswell and going to other universities and putting duplicates of everything that I saved is really probably the only thing that has protected me. And things happen like, okay, the auto accident, was that caused? Was the person paid for that or didn't realize it? See, we've got an awful lot of mind control that has been taking part of our peoples. And so the debriefing you asked about, when they got back from the moon, once it was determined the information they had, then they were, I call it mind control, and are programmed that they couldn't go any further with the information. Because, again, most of the whole Apollo program was during the Cold War, and whoever could get to the moon first and show that we had that amount of control of not just the Earth, but within our solar system, that's what has protected and prevented a World War III. And I'm glad to see that we've made some progress.
Yeah. I don't mean to be contradictory, Ken, but William Tompkins kind of said it differently. He said some of the astronauts were briefed they had planned on seeing things on the backside of the moon and so forth from the lunar orbiter images, and I, even if you're briefed on something like that, I think actually seeing it would blow your mind, enough to rethink all of existence and life in general. So when they came back, that's why they were just sitting there like they'd lost their,
lost their mind, memory.
Lost their mind,
you're quite right.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah. So William Tompkins.
Yeah, the late William Tompkins. Go ahead.
I was going to say he really helped out an awful lot, and
yeah, told the truth.
You're right. The communications between the spacecraft, mission control, and the world picking up signals had to be encoded information and then when they got back, they were debriefed, absolutely, but under such control that they didn't come forward, except for those that were willing to. Buzz Aldrin later, and Edgar Mitchell, and Jim Irwin, and Jim Irwin and I probably spent, let's see, I got 3,000 hours inside the lunar module, and he and I probably spent 500 hours together, and an awful lot of time to talk about things about that line. So
yeah, Cooper came forward. I think Scott Carpenter came forward, with the pictures that they took that were never shown to the public,
Right.
Scott Carpenter said there were aliens with us the entire time.
Well, there was a problem with the Apollo 13. Yeah. Apollo 13 that we almost lost the whole crew, and it came out that they were being followed by alien spacecraft all the way during
they almost boarded the craft for them to save them.
That's correct.
I guess that on the Apollo 13 there was also someone that was sick on the ship, and so that was an issue.
Yes. Right.
So he had a cold or the flu or TB or something. But
you're right.
This information came out from Colonel Lauren Dietrichson, who said that they almost boarded the alien craft to get them back home.
But it was with the team that I was part of in the what do we call the back room area at Mission Control, where we were sitting there, and they came. The director, who was the director at the time, came and he dumped a whole bag full of material that we had in on the table. So he says, "I don't care what you do, but find a way." And they had to go and figure a way inside the lunar module how to hook up umbilical cords that would normally have hooked to our spacesuits to be opening air, and we were using the portable life support systems of the lunar module to purify the air so that they get back, because the command module we had an explosion in the power supply to the service module portion of the command module that blew up, and they had to shut it down almost totally completely. So later we were able to go back inside and then get things hooked up so that once we were approaching the Earth, and it was just a one-shot deal, come in and orbit and then make our descent, the command module had to have the engine started up, and the only way we could do that is come from the lunar module back into the command module, get the batteries, short battery, because that's what happened to the explosion of the service module, is it damaged the whole batteries, and they only had a couple of hours of power to handle all the communications and stuff they needed to do the re-entry into the Earth and make their landing in the ocean, the Pacific Ocean, and be picked up. And that's, so, we had to get a little carried away with some of that, because it was amazing how we all worked together and were able to make it happen and get those guys back safely. Tompkins has been a great reporter in putting out the good information, and it's sad that he's no longer with us. And that's the problem that has happened. And I mentioned in the very beginning is they've waited for so many people to die and keep the information from getting to the public. But we've reached the point now that enough information and things like your program right now, where you're getting the information out to probably thousands and hopefully millions of people, that'll make them start thinking and wondering, I wondered about that. I'll bet that's true. We really did see aliens. Well, okay. Now we've got you the information. You've got the research. Check it out and find out. You're not alone. We're not alone. And you asked about different species. They're the grays, the small grays. You have the large grays. You have the Anunnaki, which are the ones that are 7 and 8 feet tall, 10 feet tall, that have been on the planet Earth for long periods of time. You have the reptilians. A lot of the information that's available in documents and books and things, people need to reread them and open their minds up and say, this probably is true. So we're getting the information out there, doing our best. Okay?
Yes, excellent. Now, another burning question is, why have we not gone back to the moon?
Bret, you want to try or you want me to go?
Yeah, go ahead and tell that story.
Well, part of it was and I may get it wrong here, but part of it was after we had completed and gone to the moon, and the whole space race between Russia and now Japan and Europe and everything else, the other countries that have put satellites around the moon, and the governments, in order to maintain control over their peoples and things, they had to come up with well, there's no reason for us to go back. We've got satellites going on. We don't need to even have to do that. If the information was made, well, and that's the other part too, excuse me. Apollo, let's see, you've got 15, 16, 17. Yeah, Apollo 17, on its return to Earth, right after they had dropped off the lunar module to impact on the lunar surface, because we did that on each one of the missions after Apollo 14. Anyway, oh boy, here we go with that blackout again. Help me out here, just a second. Where was I? I thought it was terrible when you get.
If we, why didn't go back to the moon?
Why didn't go? Thank you very much. And that was, it was a signal that was sent back, that was picked up at Mission Control, actually in Australia, and it was transmitted on to Mission Control at Houston, that said, do not return, you're not ready yet. And again, this was transmitted directly from the moon. We were about halfway back to the Earth on the trans-Earth insertion. That's when you leave the moon and you're at speed enough to break free from the lunar gravity to then even if you shut your engines off, which we did, you depend upon the gravity force of the Earth to draw the spacecraft faster and faster as you approached Earth, just as the factor occurred. And you had to be able to time your landing to be able to into the Earth's atmosphere, or you'd burn up just like a meteor would do if it came in too fast. Anyway, that was the key there, is that we were told by the extraterrestrials from the moon, from the signal to Apollo 17, that said, and was picked up by our radio and communications here in Australia. The signal came back and said, do not return, you're not ready yet. And that was quite true. Now, since that Apollo, we're talking about Lord have mercy, how many years since 1972?
Yeah.
To get the people of the earth ready to understand that, we're not the only ones in the universe. It's about time to realize that.
Yeah, the other thing is we're sending our most hierarchical and militant minds to the moon. So this is the other problem, is that, the ETs have contacted most human beings actually through dreams, or they communicate graphically, so they don't have to learn a million different languages. The thing is that they get really tired of the military hierarchical mind, because a lot of the ETs up there have a somewhat more of a hive mind, so they all know what's going on, and there's nothing to hide in that society. So they don't really understand that, but they know it's a very corrupt system, what we have, as far as that hierarchy goes. So we're not really on the same page as a lot of different extraterrestrial races out there. So that's one of the other reasons why they said we're not ready yet, is because we can't do that yet. And some of these systems have to break down so that we can join our intergalactic community.
Now, as far as the secret space program, how far does it go? Do we have operations on Mars right now?
Yes. Bret, you want to jump in? I actually have some photographs that have come from the archive that show actually from our Mars orbiting cameras that have transmitted signals back before they got doctored up. It actually shows our base, at least one of our bases that I know of, on the lunar surface. Excuse me, on the Mars surface. So, and as far as the secret space program, even the President Trump now recently called, and I think, what was it he called? It's going to be the
Space Force.
Space Force. I thought it was Space Command. Space Force. Okay.
Exactly what we don't need out there. Yeah.
Is what? A Space Force?
Yeah.
Yes.
They'll blow us away for one thing.
Translate they who?
Any extraterrestrial species that found us threatening.
Well, that's the key. Found us threatening.
Right.
And that's the key of the contact, direct contact, and full disclosure is happening to prevent that kind of an event to take place. Although I mentioned at the very beginning about the auto accident and the attitudes of, from a religious side, if you look at the creation of Homo sapiens on the planet Earth as an experiment in order to see how well we can develop somewhat on our own, and this is hard to handle. But until we've grown to the point where we can be trusted as a species, then we have been kept out of joining intelligent species throughout the universe, etc., and taking more of the place of what I think God wanted us to learn to become. That's why the 10 Commandments were given to us. There's so much of our existence that we need to come to grips with that will help the whole part of full disclosure going on right now.
Now, Mr. Sheppard, any comments about operations on Mars?
Yeah, what I'd like to go back to your original thing about the secret space program. There's always been a secret space program. What we have is the overt science that they show us through NASA and television and all of that, through universities and such. And then we have our covert science, which has been going on since at least the 50s with General Trudeau and Eisenhower. They have, yes. Yeah.
Now, can you talk on going on back into the 1919s, 1920s, and the contact with the Nazis and along that line? Go for it.
Well, yeah. There were contacts that were actually made with a spirit board, and I have friends that are doing that today. And these three instances in the same place on Earth, near the Danube River Valley and into Czechoslovakia and Germany. There were the Gulf Breeze 6, with Vance Davis, and they were actually using a spirit board and contacted an extraterrestrial that told them to go AWOL. They got caught. They were given honorable discharges, which is like boggles my mind. I was in the Army, around that time, even before that time, actually. So the wall was still up, and they were communicating on the other side with the Russians and so forth. So all of that was very fascinating. But the point is that the Brill girls, Maria Orsich and her father, Thomas Orsich, and a couple of other people, Sigourney, I believe, was her name. But they were actually getting Aldebaran transmissions through the spirit board type of divination or seancing type of thing. And one thing, they were writing in High Illyrian. And I know David Wilcox and other people have said that it was Sumerian, but it is absolutely not anything near the Sumerian language. It is Illyrian. It is from the Baltic region.
Now, the thing though that is important is that the Nazi government and the aliens, most of them are of a hive mentality. In other words, they're all mentally linked and connected together, and they function as one, as a society, as one. Whereas the Nazi government in Germany was operating pretty much on a high position, and this is why they made contact with the group, the women that Bret was just talking about, and their families, and they in turn were discussing with the Nazis and promoting information. That's how come the Germans jumped so far ahead of all the rest of the governments in advancement in space. It's just that our countries had enough power and money and creation to overpower them and end the war before the Nazi government took over the whole entire planet Earth. And then after
they took them. They brought them over here with Project Paperclip, and along with all of their experiments, the little Nazi spacecrafts and everything else. And they were actually flying them around in Utah and California in the 70s. And a lot of those really clear images of UFOs are actually part of that secret space program. They even called them Nordics. Nordics to say that they were German. And
that goes back to South America.
Yeah, Teutonic area, So that was
and take that on back to take that on back to the South Pole, Bret. If you've got the information there, somehow that
New Schwabenstein. Yeah, I have some of that information.
Yeah, so that's and that's when the Nazis moved what they had left down to Antarctica and continued with some direct contact. The best that we've got. Who's our good friend that was just down there? Just got back up to the States. The big, tall, almost 7 foot tall guy, Bret. You know what I'm talking about?
Oh,
come on. Help the old man's memory here.
Which big, tall guy? Yeah.
He's one of our good friends that was at the last big conference they had up here.
No, Brad Olson just recently went.
Yeah. That's the one. Thank you.
I just had him on a couple of times.
I think he's probably listening to us right now.
Yeah, probably so.
Yeah.
So how far does this secret space program go? I mean, you said we have operations on Mars. Does it go beyond Mars?
Yeah, I was told I'm sorry, Ken. I was told by a friend that we have things out there that make Star Wars look like little children's toys.
Yeah, they're talking about the mothership as well as a whole fleet. That's why the ranking of staff is more of the Navy staff, the 5-star admirals, etc. So we do have the fleet command organization. So all of that information has to come out during full disclosure, and everybody needs to just hold their teeth in their heads, don't get too shook up. But it's been going on. The secret space program has been going on since back in President Eisenhower.
Yep, exactly right.
When you're talking about some of this technology, would you say that they actually have things like jump rooms where you can instantly be on the moon or Mars?
Yes. And I want to say that because through hypnotic regression sessions that I've been through, as well as, oh geez, there I went. One of our associate friends, Bret, that he's putting out his show. Oh yeah, he actually, yeah, Andrew Bishaga, who actually ran for president in the last election, and hopefully he'll be in a position to be able to do that. He's not the only one that has been in a position to have direct contact. By that I mean mentally, etc. Oh gosh, I hate the fact. You know, people, if you are driving cars, pay attention to what you're doing, because you can really hurt people. And this upsets me terribly. That
we were talking about the jump rooms.
Yeah.
Okay. And Andy, he comes out and lays out exactly, because as he's a little bit younger than I am, considerably really, that he wound up going into jump rooms and being transported to Mars, as well as to some of the, I believe, one of the major mother crafts. Now, this is something that I'm coming out and going to tell you for the first time publicly, because I've maintained the credibility with all the documents, records, and proof and everything going on. Now, from the hypnotic regression session that was done by Dr. Sasha Lesson, right, on me taking, you talked early, Bret, about contact you had when you were very young.
Yeah, well, I'm not the only one. I know that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I've had 2 sessions, and I'm looking forward to the third one here. Going all the way back to when I was in the 1st and 2nd grade, there was a first contact that I had when I lived in a little town called Hart, H-A-R-T, Hart, Texas, where during October and tremendous winter storm, thunderstorm coming in, and lightning struck about a football field away from our house, in a field across the dirt road to where we lived. And the next morning, my brother and I, 2 brothers and I, went out to go see what happened there. And I ran ahead of my oldest brother. You know, by then he was, let's see, I was 7, he's 5, you know, years older than me. He wasn't going to be, you know, act silly, he thought. And the other brother, I had to outrun him. I got to the area where it was about, I'd say over 50 feet across, a circular diameter of smashed down, probably maize, I think it was maize at that time, in that area. And then on the far side of this smashed down area was a very large bird, which identified as a whooping crane. They could stand nearly 4 feet tall. It was on the far side, and it turned its head, looked at me, turned its head back, took about 3 or 4 steps, opened its wings, flapped twice, and then poof, disappeared. Well, through the hypnotic regression, he went in and asked me questions. Says, well, take a look. What is the bird doing? And it's coming out in the first book on Ken's hypnotic regression, I guess it is right now. The book isn't out published, and it's almost finished. Anyway, the clothing, or the suit that looked like a whooping crane, fell away, and it was a gray alien that then was being teleported up to a craft that disappeared. There was a lot of things going on back in the mid 40s, all over the world, where there was contact being made. Now, Bret, you mentioned how you were contacted. There have been missing times in my lifetime of 77 years where I show up, and they said, well, where were you? And I go, well, dang, I went, I don't remember, at any rate, that I couldn't put together missing hours or a few days. And now, through the hypnosis, either Dr. Session, and we may be using another PhD specialist to go back and bring out more information. So I'm not the only one. There are lots of people, and this is what the ETs have switched over from, because it didn't work working with the Nazis to help what they thought was the most powerful species of humans on the planet, to where there was a society completely controlled. Whereas now the experiment of humans in the rest of the world, in the United States and others, we've been a bit of an experiment to see if we can survive without destroying ourselves. And you're going to find there are a lot of other people throughout the whole earth that have been in contact, such as what I just described and what Bret described in his challenge. So I'm now coming forward with saying that wait till you read it, wait till you hear about it, wait till you see what took place, and then you can test it and find out, is he wacky, is he nuts, or is he telling the truth? Well, I'm telling you the truth of the things that took place in my life, and in some cases, I have documentation to prove it. So with that, it's something new for you. How do you like that?
Yeah, very good. Looking forward to that. Now, do you think all of the world governments are involved in the secret space program?
Yes.
No. You say yes, I say no.
I
Okay,
think
Bret, tell me why.
I think all the government scientists are on the same page. All of our governments don't know. Yeah.
Right. Okay. You're right. That's what I was going to hit you on. Okay.
Yeah.
So we try to keep each other honest of the facts that we have.
So you'd say more the deep state governments.
Well, it's not really a government at that point. It's just
Yeah, right. Just the deep state.
Just kept a secret. Yeah, it's a scientists that are working in a very close knit, compartmentalized lab or something. They would know about these things.
What did President Trump just say recently? What did he call it, Bret? We'll create a new space force.
I don't know. I don't want to get into Trump. I don't like him. I never did. I have never liked him.
We will stay away from any politics. How's that? But
that sounds good.
Yeah, that was my understanding. Because instead of just the Army, Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard, you name it, there will be a new branch called Space Force. I think not Space Command, but Space Force.
Yeah, Space Force.
There's stuff is, and if that's what it takes, Bret, to get the truth out to the world and public, I'm for it. Otherwise, I avoid the politics best I can.
Yeah, you bet.
Now, I have a lot of abductees, contactees, experiencers, and there's a large consensus that they're saying there's a hybrid program that's been going on for a while, and it's ongoing. You have any information about that?
To be a little more specific, when you're saying hybrid, are you referring to hybrids between Earthlings and extraterrestrials?
Correct. Yes.
Bret?
I don't have any personal experience with hybrids, but I have friends who say that they were abducted, and their parts of their body were taken out. Eggs, that sort of thing, and there apparently are experiments that are being done on these ships out in space, and actually in parts of the inner moon, where they're experimenting with genetics and DNA and all of that. And Ken, you do have a story about that, about hybrids in jars of different species.
Oh yeah, as a matter of fact, and this came out in one of the regressions, is that we were teleported to Mars, where we were being trained, and then they would be kind of like brain wiped and transported back to the Earth and let us grow up with our families. There were times when I was in the first grade, second grade. My mother and stepdad and them were searching, trying to find me for almost a whole day, and then I crawled out of the dirty clothes hamper in the bathroom, and they said, "Have you been there all day?" I think so. Well, anyway, part of what Bret is talking about, help me out here, the
regression.
Experiment. Okay, there we go. So on one of the events that happened to me, and this, as I say, came out during the regression, is that a class group that I was with, and I'm saying it was Mars. I don't know that it was Mars. It was another inhabitable planetoid or what have you, where there were like big cities and the whole atmosphere was tolerable. We were taken up to an orbiting mothercraft, and inside we were the whole class of kids were taken into other than where the first craft where the craft landed, then we were taken out of the craft, the shuttlecraft, into a laboratory area where they had some large large test tubes in which they had different ages of species being incubated, so to speak, in these tubes and maturing. And this is where we were being shown that they were blending different species DNA together to create and for each planet type where they put, like they've done here on the Earth, and helped create human beings and stuff to live in our atmosphere. There are other planetoids and other galaxies and places where they want to help advance the society and intelligent beings, semi-intelligent beings, whatever there, by going through test tube type creations of new beings, if you will. Yeah. Boy, am I going to get in trouble with? Yeah, I'm sure you. Am I going to get in trouble with my religious friends after getting my degree in theology? I'll probably run into a lot of trouble with that. But if you've got an open mind and a trust in being that your God is got enough power and ability to do things, it probably is an experiment that your God is involved with. That's as far as I'll go tonight. How's that?
Now, Mr. Sheppard, you write that we are in a biological matrix. Can you talk about that? Explain what that is.
Well, there's a what I mean by biological matrix is we're sort of in a three-dimensional type experiential greenhouse type of thing, where we are farmed, improved upon. This isn't like evil farming, like going around and picking people out and taking their blood and all of, it's not like some kind of maniacal thing, but rather a study, just like you would if you had a garden and you were deciding, which one is growing better than the other one the next year and the next year. So it's something similar to that.
Sounds like you're explaining what the Earth has been.
Yeah, exactly right. To put it simply. And the other thing, the matrixy part is a very strange thing because it's perceptual. We create things with the context, with our context that we use for perception. And so far, we have been mainline fed our context. So it alters our perception into the direction of whoever wants to control us, And these are not aliens or something. These are real, actual people that want to make a lot of money, something like that. So I don't know about. Well, money. Yeah, it's part of it. But going all the way back to Samaria, they were already doing those types of things, trying to control people or manipulate them through religion or economics or some other social program. So those are social engineering things. Yeah, it goes into social engineering.
You kind of some of the myths and stories written about the half horse, half human experiments and things that were done. Okay, I'm with you. Go ahead. Any more on that?
Well, yeah, that was said to have been done through our ancient myths and such. That they did. They tried experiments, but like in Russia, they were trying to make gorillas with Russian women to create a super soldier, right? But yeah. The thing is that failed because it's not genetically compatible. And I think that those that were doing experiments like the ancient Greeks, which were actually the Illyrians, Dacians, and Thracian people of the Baltic regions, and also the Ukraine, were experimenting, trying to always create some kind of super soldier or something that could do more than a human being, right? So even though their experiment failed, they still wrote the myth as if actually happened.
Okay.
There are a lot of, I'd say, interesting things happening with disclosure right now. Of course, I don't trust the sources, the military, the government, where this is coming from, but it is something that we haven't really seen before, the level of, incidents that are being reported and stuff like that. What do you think is going on? Is it just a slow drip to prepare us for something? Do you think we're going to have full disclosure?
Yeah, go ahead.
You want me to take that first? Okay.
Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely. What you're saying is absolutely true. And again, you'll go back to the Brookings report that Eisenhower asked for, and the direction, and you can't fault the government for trying to do what they thought was the best thing to protect not only the countries, the governments, but our people's societies, is to not let that information out to the public, because the average person can't deal with the fact that the universe is a vast, unbelievable size, and the existence of other planets, other solar systems, other galaxies that we can now look at with our giant telescopes that we put in orbit, etc. They're out there, and people are now educated to the point enough that we can deal with that kind of experiments. And it's a process, like Bret was touching on, where as a whole, human Homo sapiens sapiens are part of, in my opinion, a package or an experimentation to bring on beings that are more capable of independent thinking, and hopefully to do the right thing, instead of a controlled things like red ants, or ants, I should say, where you're either a working species, or you're a drone, or you're what have you. In order to create beings to the point of I guess the term I would say of godlike in the abilities to create. This is only my own opinion of what this all leads up to, is that we each and all, once we have gone through lives and experiments and learned that we're capable of going out and creating another universe and go through it again, in order to ultimately have created beings of intelligence of infinity, for lack of something better. It gets way over my head at that point. So, yeah, you're right.
What are your thoughts on disclosure right now, Mr. Sheppard?
Well, I don't believe in disclosure. How could you, when the truth changes all the time? Our consensus reality changes whenever we discover something new. So it's not. I don't think it's going to be so much of a disclosure, because our governments and human, hierarchical minds will never disclose things that would ruin their consensus reality, or their ability to pull the world over our eyes, so to speak, to make money and such. But so disclosure, a human version of disclosure, is kind of ridiculous, really. I think that it is sort of dripped in. I think through the experiences of the individual, we will eventually have what you consider disclosure.
Okay, I'm going to have to step in and say that Bret and I are going to disagree a little bit to that, because and the disclosure is not going to be just instantaneous. Everybody understands it. It has been, and it has been, a very slow process. Well, actually, if you go back into the ancient societies that we've read and studied about, but I'm going back primarily back to President Eisenhower and his direct contact with extraterrestrials and the meetings and the events, in order to prepare our societies to be ready to accept the fact that we are not alone in this universe. And that's where we are right now, is that those of us with information have come forward. People have been coming forward, and on their own, they've been easy to control by debunkers and by governments, etc. And part of it is exactly what Bret says, is that it's the government people. People are greedy. They like power. and those that are in government powers don't want to step down and let another species, another step in and say, okay, this is the way you should really grow your crops. This is the way you should really do this. But yet, to show love for the existence of intelligent human beings worldwide, you're going to have to come to the point of accepting that we're at a point where a little bit of help can go a long way. And that's what I'm calling full disclosure, is now a lot of help coming our way. And it's going to become a process of, when I say full disclosure, of event happenings that makes it easier for the people to understand. And it won't be events of panic and, oh, we're going to be killed, we're going to destroy the earth, etc. And from some of my sources, this is one of the things why when we have our secret space program, we have fleets that are able to come and go outside of our Earth's gravitational force field. But any foreign aliens, and there are some negatives, reptilians for one, and certain types of reptilians, that to do the best to prevent them from coming in and causing a lot more conflict going on. So we are, I disagree a little bit with what you're saying, but I think you can see where I'm coming from.
Sure.
Step by step, we're getting it done.
Now,
and,
I see that there, you know, with disclosure, there would be some things that would threaten the system right now, like free energy, miracle cures, things that are known about by, you know, those in control right now that probably don't want the public having their hands on. So I think, you know, a lot of disclosure would threaten some of that system.
You're right. And it's going to be, some of it will be very difficult to deal with within the governments that are the way in which they're controlled. That, as you said, in medical treatments, life, our genealogy,
transportation, right, all that stuff.
But yet, when you have that happening, and everybody sees it's happening, then everybody's going to want to have their share, and you have to be sure that it can be doled out steady, and that's where the government's going to come in, is they have to be able to control the speed in which we make our transition from primitive to advanced technology, intergalactic space intelligence. It's happening. Maybe they can help my memory.
And anything else to add to that, Mr. Sheppard?
Well, you know, it's gosh, I could talk for 3 hours on disclosure stuff, you know, as far as that goes. I don't have a whole bunch to add to that, other than I think when the time is right, there is no hierarchy in the universe that's going to stop us knowing what's going on.
And any feeling on if that's going on now and happening now, or are you expecting it further down the line, Bret?
I think they've been training us already through the movies, through videos on YouTube. They've already been training us, preparing us for that type of disclosure that you're talking about. But I think they want a controlled disclosure to where they're still in charge of it.
Yeah, Facebook's going to play a big part in that too, worldwide.
Yeah.
Yeah, the internet is playing a big part in everything, you know, especially with UFO sightings and all of that, because of the access to the information now. I'd certainly love to see, you know, whether it comes from our government or it comes from extraterrestrials, you know, within our lifetime, you know, I'd love to see full disclosure and, you know, possibly open communication with these beings like we used to have.
Well, I believe, based on what I have source of, that we are now moving into that phase right now, and that what you just described could well be what we can all look forward to. So it's exciting. It's great to be alive and living at this time in the existence of humans, and I'm more excited about that than I am having my birthday. Okay.
Great. That was.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I'm also excited about those things, and even if I get a glimpse of it before I pass on or whatever, I'm happy that the future will have it, our children will have it, younger people than us will have it. I'm very excited about that. So it's an eventuality. It's like a train. They can't stop, without the brakes or whatever. It's coming. It's just coming.
Very good.
It's happening now.
Now, I want to thank you, gentlemen, so much for joining us tonight. That was fantastic information. Do either one of you have anything else to add before we close out tonight?
I would step in that real fast. There are a lot of people who have been involved in secret space programs as well as government projects and events and things, and where they've been exposed to some of the information knowledge we've talked about. My only advice to them is come forward now, because now is the time to bring the information out, because this is the time for the full disclosure. It's time for us to take our place as sentient or intelligent beings and in the galaxy, in the universe. And so I think that, and that's what God would want, is expecting of us, and that is to take the step forward with knowledge that we have and make the truth come forward. And I'll shut up.
Yeah, there's you can also, if you want to read more information about that, I've got my book on archive.org called Digital Moon by Bret and Sheppard. I also have Ken's images on archive.org under Ken Johnston Sr. And there's also Ken's Moon by Ken Johnston Sr. at Amazon.com, along with Digital Moon, if you wanted to have a physical paperback or something to that nature. But you can read our books. We've got a lot of videos out there and all of that. Just Google our names.
Yes, and I will leave links to all of that in our description on YouTube. Once again, thank you both so much for coming on tonight, and I will have to have you on again in the future.
All right.
I look forward to it.
All right, you two have a great night.
Yeah, be sure and put the T in the name Johnston with the T. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes,
Have a good night.
All right, good night.